First order of business, I think, is to open the meetings. I'm Larry Murphy, Chair of the Planning Board, and to my left is
Mary Stone.
Pete Pecos?
Woody Knight.
I'm Alicia Greco, Chair of the Select Board. And to my right is Selectman Jeff Walker, he's in the Select Board, Selectwoman Leslie Matthews,
With the low chair,
and
Dana Packer, Select Board member.
Dana Packer.
Okay, thank you. We may as well get right to it. The first item on the agenda.
Entertain a motion to open.
We don't do that, but I'll be
Okay.
happy to entertain.
Can I entertain a motion to open?
Motion to open.
Motion to open.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
And then we do the
We're in
pledge.
agreement? Oh, Pledge of Allegiance?
Yeah.
Okay.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for keeping me straight on the straight and narrow here. We good to go?
Yes.
Okay. Now we'll turn to the first item on the agenda, which is consideration of appointment of Scott Kinter to fill the planning board vacancy. This would be an appointment through May 14th, 2024, which is the next annual town election. As I think you all know, there is a vacancy on the board due to the death of our friend and most longtime serving member of the board, George Morse. Scott Kinter, who is with us today, 23 Shandell Drive, has sent in a letter expressing his interest in appointment to the position. I think you all have a copy of that. We met with Scott, that is, the planning board met with Scott on November 15th and unanimously recommended him for this position. And under the statute, we did get some direction from town council on this. The appropriate statute is Chapter 41, Section 81A. The appointment is to be made by a joint vote of the select board and the remaining members of the planning board, again, until the next annual town election. So Scott, if you'd like to come up to the podium and just introduce yourself and tell us why you're interested in this position.
That's for the TV.
It doesn't amplify your voice.
No.
Doesn't work at all.
I think Martha may have said I was gonna be interviewed, and I was thinking, the last time I was interviewed was about 30 years ago. So I'm a little out of practice, but I'm a kind of a boomerang resident to Newbury. I moved into our new home in middle of March of this year, but I raised my two daughters, and my wife and I raised my two daughters for a couple of years in Newbury back in the late '90s. We enjoyed our time here, and then we went off to Salisbury for a bit, and then came into Newburyport, and now we're back where we hope we'd eventually get to at some point. I've been in the real estate business for 30 years, or actually been in the real estate business for 40, but been with one company for 30, and that's over the last 30 years. And I work for Avalon Bay Communities. It's, depending on the day or the week, we're either the first or the second largest multifamily publicly traded real estate investment trust in the country. I really started on the construction side many years ago and worked my way into the development side of the business. Once I started for Avalon, then ended up getting back into the construction side of the business. Really started at the lowest level you could possibly be in my business, in a trench, installing sewer pipe, and worked hard over the last 30 years to get to the position that I have now, which is I'm national head of construction for my company. I have been responsible for over the last 5 years, probably about 15 billion, in construction, mostly for rent apartments, and we call them apartment communities. We've done a lot of affordable housing throughout the entire country, but we've been very successful here in the Commonwealth. And I've spent some time, as Mary challenged me at the last meeting. She asked me if I had read the master plan. I hadn't, and I'm not finished with it yet because it's a big book. But I did find some interesting things, in that master plan that I liked. I liked the affordable housing piece. There wasn't a lot to say about the really what we would call workforce housing, which is housing that I've had a lot of success, or my company's had a lot of success building in its market rate, but it's really built with the goal of getting our townspeople wherever we're developing, whether the firemen, teachers, policemen, folks that typically wouldn't be able to afford housing, in the communities that they work. And we've been able to do a lot of that. So again, I'm excited to be here. I've always wanted to dabble a little bit, being on the other side, of the table for many, many years. I've learned a lot, but I've never been as close to really planning board. I'm not sure how many times, or how many meetings that I was in front of you folks for, but it was a lot. And I was impressed by really everybody, being respectful of one another. Everybody, I think, being on the same really page as I think what the mission was. There was no infighting on this board, which I've seen many, many times. And I thought that if there was any board, and again, I've thought about it for many years, that I'd like to be a part of, would be this planning board. For certain, I'm not going to be able to fill the shoes, but I'm hopeful that, really with my experience, and I like to think that I'm innovative. I like to seek really first to understand, then be understood. But I like to listen, and I'm pro housing. And I think we have a lot of opportunity in the town.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. That's great. Anyone have any questions for Scott?
Let's start with your board.
Yeah. We've met Scott before. As I said, we met on the 15th, and we went through much of the same exercise. But do you have any further questions for Scott?
No, I was very interested in whether you had read the master plan.
Yeah.
And so,
I can't even say I'm halfway through yet, but
We
I've been cherry picking chapters and parts, but there's a lot of interesting stuff. And what I found most interesting was that I think we should, or I think the town, the board, planning board, and the select board, that the implementation committee, I think that's going to be very, very important in order to really execute the plan. And that would be something that I would certainly happy to volunteer for that, but I think that needs to be implemented pretty quickly.
Thank you.
We expect you to have it committed to memory by the next meeting.
No,
The
translate it
entire
into
master.
Latin.
Mary does.
Translate it into Latin, okay?
Translated in Latin.
Peter, any
I
questions?
don't have any supplemental questions, but I second your concern of activating an implementation, because that's our next step with this plan. It took a long time to get it to here, and I think we need to really follow the blueprint that was put forward. Yeah, so I concur with that. Thanks.
Woody, any questions, comments?
I don't have any questions, but I appreciate that you stepped up and willing to volunteer to be on the planning board, and look forward to possibly working with you.
Me too.
Thank you.
I just have one more thing. Scott, you've worked with a lot of communities. What is it that you find different and What excites you about Newbury? Why do you want to participate?
What I've found is, been in front of a lot of planning boards, zoning boards. There's just, there's a lot of disagreement. There just seems to be, many folks on these boards have their own agendas. They're not really putting, they join, they serve, but I've always had the feeling, and not every board by any means, but some just don't have it together. Meaning they don't really have the town's, I call it commander's intent. Just the mission. The big, hairy, audacious goals. And it gets in the way. I love Newbury. I love the open space. I do a lot of boating in Newbury, and I love the people, and I think that there does need to be some change. I don't like that it was in the plan that Newbury's fairly unaffordable right now. And it's I don't think it's fair. I mean, my daughter is living in South Hamilton, which is a very, very nice town, but she'd like to live in Newbury, and she can't afford what she has in South Hamilton, really in Newbury. I'd like to see some of that change over the next decade or so, and I'm not sure how we can get that done, but I think the plan is a great start. But I think also the infrastructure, the water and the sewer, that needs to be figured out.
The lack of it, you mean?
The lack of it. Exactly.
Thank you.
Good, thanks. I think we're good.
That's my boy, Dana, you wanna?
I don't have any questions, no.
Leslie?
I do remember you coming in front of the planning board when you were working on your own property. I think what you're presenting with us tonight is I think you'll be a good fit for the planning board because you seem to have the same temperament and the same how can I put this? Everybody on the planning board is very, very courteous to one another, and I think you'll fit in wonderfully.
Thank you.
And you have a great background, so I think that, you got one step up on a lot of people that, including myself, that came into the position.
I will say that, my time in front, I don't know how many conservation meetings I had. I was very impressed by that board as well. I think I got most of the votes, but the one vote I didn't get, the gentleman came to see me after the meeting, and he shook my hand and he said, I'm very confident you're gonna build, a beautiful home. But please don't take my vote personally, which I thought was very nice. I had never seen that before, so that was meaningful.
Jeff?
I think, glad to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
It's funny you're at this meeting, but it's good for you to be here. Some of the things you talked about, certainly by attrition, haven't got solved, meaning water and sewer, because of the cost and lack of ability to accomplish the task and on and on. So, yeah, as we move forward, there's a lot of things in this community that need to be addressed. As we find out a lot of times, it's either the lack of space, the lack of subsoils, so there's a lot of issues that when you live in town for a long time, that certainly, like Woody and his family, that come to the surface on what you can do and what you can't do. So maybe you have the creative ability to look beyond some of those things. Would be interesting.
Look forward to it.
No, and I just echo the same. I know we have sit with two fellow planning board members, both Leslie and Jeff have sat on the planning board at some time in the past, and I agree with you, like almost everything that you said. It's important to have goals and to have a whole board or a committee working for the best interests of the community. It's always most helpful when everybody's in the boat rowing in the same direction. So, I mean, I hear you loud and clear. I think you're gonna make an excellent addition to the planning board. Thank you for stepping up and serving. This appointment is a short appointment, it's only for a few months, you will have to run for the seat. And I look forward to seeing the signs up there in the community. Thank you.
So I have to have signs?
When you run for
Depends, wait to see who pulls paper.
Maybe I could recycle some of these guys' signs.
Well, would anyone care to make a motion to appoint Scott Kinter of 23 Shandell Drive Extension to the vacancy?
I'd be happy to.
All right, thank you, Peter.
Second.
All right. I don't know if we need a roll call vote for this or not, but I'll take one anyway. Mary, how do you vote?
Yes.
Peter, how do you
Yes.
vote?
Yes.
I vote yes as well.
And I'll do the same with the planning board. Dana, how do you vote?
Yes.
Leslie?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Alicia, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Congratulations,
Thank you.
Scott.
Thank you.
I will just make one note that you need to see the town clerk and sign the book and get sworn in before you can vote. So, is any big meetings coming? I don't know when the planning board meets next, but
The 20th.
the 20th, so you need to have that done before the 20th.
I can do that Friday afternoon.
You won't find anybody here.
We're closed on Fridays.
You'll be doing it by yourself.
Actually, you might, but
I've sworn myself in before.
Yeah, just before we move on, just a reminder too, we do also have an opening for an associate member, which is, unlike the 5 elected positions, the associate member is an annual appointment by the select board from July 1 to June 30th each year. So if you know anyone who's interested, please contact the planning department or the select board for that matter, and we'd very much like to get that seat filled as well. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is discussion of the MBTA Communities Multifamily Zoning with Ian Burns and Kayla Rental from Merrimack Valley Planning Commission.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Hey folks, I just want to make a brief introduction. My name's Gerard Witten. I'm with Merrimack Valley Planning Commission. Tonight, my team and I are here to talk to you about the state's MBTA Communities Multifamily Housing Law. This was a law that was put into place, as many of you know, a couple of years ago. There are some deadlines coming up next year and beyond, and so tonight's discussion is an important one. You might remember the last time I was in front of you, we were talking about green communities. Tonight we're talking about housing. Just as a reminder, Merrimack Valley Planning Commission is your regional planning agency. We work with your staff and all of the 14 cities and towns, in addition to Newbury, here in the Merrimack Valley, providing professional planning and technical services. In this particular case, we've been working with Martha and Kristen to really dissect the MBTA communities law and how it impacts Newbury. And that law essentially, as you know, says that any community that has or is adjacent to a commuter rail has to put in a zoning district that allows multifamily housing by right. And so we've been working with Martha and Kristen to really understand what that impact is on Newbury, and also to look at some areas that if the town chooses to pursue compliance, might be areas that would be suitable for compliance with this state regulation. So with that, let me introduce Ian Burns, who is our Community and Economic Development Program Manager. Kayla Rennie is our Community and Economic Development Planner. These folks are expert in this legislation. And tonight our intent is to give you a presentation to bring us all up to speed on where the legislation stands now, and also to look at some of these areas that we have been exploring with Martha and Kristen and really to move into more of a dialogue with you and to sort of talk about some of the pros and cons of the different areas and to help you make an informed decision about how to pursue compliance with this legislation. All of the 15 cities and towns in our planning district are impacted by this legislation. They're all subject to it. And so as you can imagine, this is an important bit of work that we've been doing as an organization with each of our communities. And it's no different here in Newbury. But this is also an important issue for me personally. As I mentioned, I've been a resident of Newbury for more than 25 years. And so I'm excited to be a participant in this process from the resident perspective as well. So thank you for having us tonight. Thank you for making time for this discussion. It's an important one, obviously. And with that, Ian, take it away.
Thank you, Gerard. Thank you, Gerard. We like to bring him out when we need a friendly resident face before we get into the nitty-gritty of the requirements here. So as Gerard mentioned, my name's Ian Burns. I oversee the Community and Economic Development team at the Planning Commission. It's great to be here with you all. We're going to go through a little bit of the guidelines and then look at your district specifically. Martha, if you want to go to the next slide, I believe we have an agenda here. So a lot up here that we're thinking about getting to, but I wanted to kind of give you a map of what we expect to go through tonight so you can anticipate one section before the next. So the first area that's going to kick off, I'm going to go through a background on what exactly the legislation and guidelines are requiring. I know we've talked with the planning board pretty extensively about this already, but we want to make sure everybody in the room is up to speed on what exactly the requirements are. And so I want to give you that update so everybody knows what we're talking about, and then we'll pause for some clarification questions if folks need to learn more about the guidelines, so we're all on the same page before we move on to the next part, which is looking at the factors that we consider when identifying some of these districts, so giving you some insight as to what we were thinking about with Martha and Kristen and the planning board as we kind of worked our way through what the potential district options could be. What are those kind of planning best practices for multifamily housing zoning? And also what are Newbury's needs and how can we use this law as an opportunity to address any needs maybe that were in that master plan or elsewhere. Then after that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Kayla. She's going to discuss the potential options that we've outlined, and you all will have a chance to see some of the districts that we're considering. An important thing to highlight that Kayla will talk about in her time when she's up here is that we have a lot of options on the table right now for your districts, and we don't need to do everything that is being proposed. The point of this was to give you an idea of the landscape of where you could pick some of these districts in town and to maybe tailor it down as a part of the discussion tonight and have a better idea of, okay, we have, let's say, 5 different options. We like these 1, 2, 3 to prioritize and move forward with the planning. That's the idea of tonight with that section. And then finally, at the end, there's some additional components of the actual zoning bylaw amendment that we are incorporating that we heard was important to the folks here in Newbury. That includes an affordability requirement for units in future development to be, or a percentage of units in future development to be affordable. And then finally, design guidelines where we are recommending certain types of design of the building to make sure it fits with the neighborhood feel of Newbury and isn't just a box going up somewhere in town that folks might not like to look at. So that's the idea, and then with that in mind, we'll dive right into it. As we usually do it, feel free to speak up at any time. We have scheduled times to pause for questions, but if I'm on a slide, please do speak up and interrupt me. You can go ahead, Martha. So a quick background on what exactly the law is talking about. So as Gerard mentioned, it passed a couple years ago. This really was coming out as a way to address Massachusetts' housing shortage. You've probably read or heard much about it, where our current supply of housing does not meet the demand, which has resulted in astronomical housing costs for residents. The goal of this legislation is also to see where we can fit some multifamily housing in communities, and we're also requiring any city and town that is bordering a commuter rail station community or has a commuter rail to zone for that housing, as Gerard had mentioned. An important thing to highlight that I want us all to keep in mind as we move forward throughout the conversation is that this is just a zoning requirement. There is no production mandate as part of this law. All the state cares about is that you have zoned an area to allow multifamily housing. So when we talk about numbers of housing units required, or when we talk about land area required, keep in mind these are all theoretical units, and it's just saying, if we had this zoning in place, would it be possible for a developer to put in that number of units if they chose to do so, if the landowner chose to sell? All these factors have to happen for development to happen. This is just zoning. Next slide, Martha. So the legislation itself, I just went over a couple points there, but a few other things to bring forward. The minimum gross density needs to be at 15 units per acre of housing. So we're going to look at what that means a little bit later on in the presentation. Here in Newbury specifically, there's not a requirement for it to be near a commuter rail station because of the population of the community and because you're classified as a small town. However, due to the spirit of the law, you'll see a little bit later on, we're thinking about locating some of the districts closer to the Newburyport border on Route 1 where there is a commuter rail station nearby. And then one last thing to highlight, there can be no age restrictions or restrictions on the number of bedrooms in the units. Next. A map to give you an idea, as Gerard mentioned, every single one of our communities is subject to this regulation. The lightest yellow on that map is an adjacent small town. That's the category that Newbury is. Essentially, the state's Department of Housing and Livable Communities broke out all of our cities and towns into categories, and each category has different requirements to meet under this law. Newbury, adjacent small town, then there's a darker yellow there, which are adjacent communities, and then the teal color are commuter rail communities with the highest level of requirements in our region. And then at the very top of that key, blue is rapid transit. We have none of those. Those are areas served directly by the T, orange line, red line, green line. Next slide, Martha. So for Newbury specifically, what are we talking about here? So as with all communities, the zoning has to allow for up to 15 units for a minimum, that should be a minimum of 15 units per acre. You have to have a capacity equal to the multifamily housing of 5% of your community's entire housing stock. For Newbury, that's that number on the bottom there. So we're required to zone for a district that could potentially hold 154 units. And it can be located anywhere in town, but it's encouraged to have reasonable access to a transit station. A snapshot of the timeline that we're looking at here. And so for Newbury, the town has taken multiple steps to get into what we call interim compliance. Interim compliance means the town has submitted a plan to the state for steps that they're going to take to get to full compliance. Newbury, as an adjacent small town, has until December of 2025 to be in compliance. However, as of right now, we're targeting your spring 2024 town meeting for an initial vote on this to see what residents are thinking. Hopefully it gets passed then, but if not, you do have until 2025 to be in compliance, unlike some other communities in our region which only have until 24. Next slide, Martha. And then why do we need to comply? At the end of the day, what happens if the town chooses not to comply or if the voters at town meeting do not approve the zoning? A couple of things to highlight. Number one, there are 3 grant programs that the state has explicitly said you will be ineligible for funding for. Those are the Housing Choice Community Grants, MassWorks Infrastructure Grants, and Local Capital Projects Funds. 2 things to highlight there. The MassWorks is where a lot of infrastructure money comes for communities, whether that's roads, sewer, etc., for additional or new projects, small bridges, that sort of thing. Local Capital Projects Funds is a piece of money that goes to housing authorities in communities. However, on top of those 3 state grant programs, there are also about a dozen other programs that the state has said that you'll be less competitive in applying for. So you can still apply for it, but compared to all the other communities that will be in compliance, you will be down a peg when competing for that pot of money from the state. So there are a pretty extensive list of grants that are on the line here. And then finally, the Attorney General in Massachusetts released guidance saying that in the opinion of the Attorney General, the law is not optional and communities have to comply. And they've said that there is a chance of communities being under civil litigation from the Attorney General's office if they do not comply by their deadline. And so there's been a lot of certain steps that the state has taken to show that. Go ahead.
So we have an open town meeting form of government.
Mhm.
What does that mean for us?
Right. It means your town meeting has to approve the bylaw. It is a 50% threshold to get to. So you have to get a 51% majority there, or 50 plus 1, and your town meeting has to pass it.
If it doesn't, we won't be eligible for this.
That's correct, which is why the strategy for you all is to go this spring. That way you have another year. If there's an issue at this spring's town meeting, we have another year to try and go back again and get the voters' approval. Yeah. And to that in that vein too, next week we'll be running a community meeting for residents to come and learn a bit more about MBTA communities. You may have heard about it. On Monday, we'll be having a community forum to encourage folks to learn and ask questions as well. Perfect timing. Any questions about the regulations themselves before we move on to a couple other things? Want to make sure everybody understands kind of what the end goal is here. Yeah.
2 things, and they're not meant to really have an answer, but
Sure.
Martha or Kristen, have we gotten a lot of money from mass infrastructure grants and other things over the years? I know the other 2, I don't think we have.
Yeah, we don't have any
But
housing
that's
authority.
just a thought. The other thing would be, these are all gonna be the typical affordable housing rate that is south of Boston, north of Boston, or they would be lower?
No, this is not affordable housing. We can require an affordability component, but,
So it's period, it's just
It's
housing
housing,
that's multiple housing.
right, and so the intention really is to increase the diversity of housing types, to allow people more options and to increase the amount of housing, which hopefully will help make it more
See,
affordable.
that's incredibly important information that you've just given the board, or at least me, because the rest of the board might already know. So I think we do need a little affordability, but it's not meant to be fully affordable housing.
Correct.
But I think the other factor there is the 15 units per acre. Is that a recommended or is that a,
That's a required.
that's a requirement?
Required
It's
minimum.
difficult to put 15 units on an acre and not make it affordable.
And
Well, not make it, not make it dense.
dense.
Right.
It might not be affordable because it's been done in a couple of places already to a point, but the size and scope of this law doesn't really fit a town like ours. So I'd be curious to see how we go about working with it.
Right, well, I think we've had a lot of conversations with Ian and Kayla about this, and there's a whole discussion sort of about the housing category, really, that this is going to be fulfilling for Newbury, which is a missing middle, and they'll get into that. But it really could go a long way to addressing some of the needs that we have, which have been identified through our housing production planning.
Can you go back to that slide, Martha, that showed the map of the region, with the yellows and the greens, that one? So, up in the North Shore, which you guys, the Merrimack Valley, I'll call it, because that's what you guys are involved with, right? You have Newbury, West Newbury, Merrimack, Groveland, Boxford, Topsfield, and Essex.
You have 12, right?
So we have 15, we don't include Topsfield and Essex, but you're referencing all the small town
Yeah,
categories.
I'm looking
Yep,
at all the adjacent small
Yep.
towns.
correct.
Are you working with all of them
We're working with Boxford and Merrimack right now, in addition to you all.
in us?
What are the rest doing?
Very similar
West.
approach to what you all are doing right now. They're not all going for next year's Springtown meeting, but they're looking at a similar bylaw structure that we've been working with the planning board and with Martha and Kristen on.
And do you know what Topsfield and Essex are doing?
I don't.
Okay.
They're outside our region.
Out of any of those towns, do we have the lowest density except for Essex?
West Newbury is the lowest. They are required to zone for about 84. In terms of density, I'm not sure your current density. Who has the
Essex
lowest
is
density? I would wager you're pretty close to West Newbury, Merrimack, and Boxford as well.
I think you've got Essex too?
No, you
Oh,
don't
I
have
thought,
Essex.
okay, good.
So on that map there, we start in Andover and Methuen and come all the way east here to Salisbury and go south as Rowley. That's our 15 communities.
Thank you.
And so, a community like Boxford and Merrimack, very similar to you all, we've been working with them. Boxford is about at the same point as you all are in getting towards their bylaw drafted and getting their districts picked out, so
Are they gonna go for the Springtown meeting too?
They haven't decided yet. Remains to be seen.
Okay.
And I think to your point about, fitting it in Newbury is well taken, and 15 units an acre is a scary number to think about when we look at some of these, and we've seen that play out in all of our communities, and so we'll kind of dive into that a little bit as to how maybe it could be adapted here and work, and how we can follow the guidelines, but hopefully find a way that may be palatable here in town.
We end up changing our height bylaws.
I was just gonna say that.
What-
Like, we're
Not by
talking
much,
like,
you're getting a teaser in there, we'll talk about it, but yeah, no, we don't need to go high. We do
Because
not need to go high.
that's a new fire department, that's a lot of different stuff when you get over certain heights.
Yeah,
Certainly.
we're looking at design guidelines, which will be very compatible with kind of the housing typologies that we have right now. So I think you'll see.
Yeah, if you wanna, we'll talk a little bit about this, but in terms of height too, as Kayla will mention when she talks about your potential districts, I mean, nothing here is above 3 stories that we're talking about in terms of dimensional requirements, so we're not going any higher than that. So some factors to consider, so these are things that we think about as we're looking at some options for you all and kind of how collectively with the town and with us, we've come to some options for you. So number one, the potential for some zoning best practices. We really want to look at where we can be proximate to transit access. So here in Newbury, that's pretty much exclusively up by the Newburyport commuter rail station. But not only transit access, but overall transportation access. So thinking maybe close to 95 or Route 1 for easy car movement, so you don't have a lot more cars moving through smaller streets in town, but we're right near some main arteries for the community. Walkability and pedestrian access, if there is any way without a car to get to any amenities or things like schools, post office, any retail or any restaurants, those are the other things we think about when we move forward. That includes that access to town amenities and public services. We also think about, is there any real potential of future development? Like I said, this is not a construction requirement. There may be some districts where it makes sense to think about their future development and how that can accomplish some things outlined maybe in your master plan and using this to get to those goals. And then finally, addressing Newbury's housing needs. What exactly are the needs here in town, and is there a way to use this law to get to those housing needs? You can go to the next slide. So as we kind of teased at before, what types of housing are we talking about here? This is really aimed at that missing middle housing that's outlined in that graphic. So on the far right are the mid-rise apartment buildings that you see a lot of once you get kind of inside the 28 belt in Massachusetts here, and you've seen a lot more of those cropping up. We're not talking about the mid-rise 5 stories and up boxes. We're also not talking about all the way on the left detached single-family homes. What we're really targeting is what we call missing middle, which is those starter homes, downsizing homes, smaller bedroom type homes where folks can live that more fit their household size than what they might be in right now. In Newbury and across our region, we've seen that there is a missing middle of housing types where you have maybe 1, 2, 3 bedroom homes compared to what you might actually need in town. And so that's things like duplexes, triplexes, and townhouses, and other types of styles of buildings together. And when we think about our design guidelines, those are the things that we're trying to get at to encourage that type of construction. So what do I mean when I say missing middle, and how does that apply to here in Newbury? So this is are 2 different charts that break down, number one, your current housing breakdown by occupancy, so how many people are living in the homes, and on the right is how many bedrooms are in those homes. And so you can start to see where the mismatch might be between folks that are occupying housing and how big those houses actually are. So as you can see, 1 or 2 person households in Newbury make up 60% of homes here in Newbury. However, 1 and 2 bedroom homes make up 28% of Newbury's housing stock. So you start to see a gap there where you have 1 or 2 person households versus 1 or 2 bedroom homes. There's a significant gap. So if folks are looking to downsize, that tells us they don't have the option to downsize because there's 60% of them are 1 and 2 person versus only 28% are 1 or 2 bedrooms. And then the second fact up there, looking at 3 or more person households make up 40% of Newbury's homes, but 3 or more bedroom homes make up 72% of Newbury's housing stock. So that's that missing middle. That gap that we're talking about is one of the things that we think we may find a way to address through this legislation, because a lot of the times when we speak about multifamily housing, we're talking about those 1, 2, even 3 bedroom units. That would hopefully get at that gap and help close that gap for residents looking for smaller housing units to live in. And then the one other piece of data we wanted to show you is the demographic trends. This is something else we consider when talking about what the need may be in Newbury. So here you can see all the way on the left is some data from 2010, and this is the percentage of different age cohorts. It's a little small under the key, but what I'll point out here is the blue line that starts all the way on the left near the bottom, and then on the right in the projection in 2040 is all the way at the top. That's your 65 plus population, which is expected to, roughly double over the time period of this graph. So that's telling us there's a significantly aging population here in town, and what are their housing needs going to be going forward, and how can we make sure we anticipate that and maybe use some of this housing to try and get at what the need may be. At the same time that age cohort is increasing in size, you also see your younger age cohorts decreasing. So that is not necessarily a trend that's set in stone in terms of your younger age cohort going down. It's based off of data that's been collected over the past 10 years. It's based off the current trends. If you have some other smaller bedroom type homes where folks can have a starter home and maybe, kids, grandkids can move back with their own families, you create some more options there. And so we're thinking, how can we anticipate the need that the projections are telling us, but how can we also make sure we're creating more opportunities for young families to get started? I'm going to pause there, so that's kind of getting you up to speed right now before we talk about some options for compliance. Any questions on that background information before I hand it over to Kayla?
One quick one, because I'm trying to, I don't think I'm negative, because I
No.
certainly know that we're challenged for the housing that you speak about. Would this be built to own, such as condos, or is this going to be like big apartment buildings?
We can't require that it is for ownership units. It would be for any type that the developer chooses when they come in.
Just zoning, we're not building.
Well, zoning is zoning.
Right, but zoning doesn't dictate ownership.
I think some
I
of your
gotta
questions,
digest that.
yeah, some of your questions
Go
may
ahead.
be answered
That's
as,
good.
as he goes
Yeah.
forward.
I think there's a direct correlation between the age group and the one or two people living in these large homes. I'm one of them. You know, like I'm over 65. I have a 4 or 5 bedroom house and all my kids are gone.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna move.
Yeah.
You know, so there certainly is a correlation there.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know how to solve that or how to fix that, but you know, like for example, this is just me thinking out loud. If you were to build a nice little duplex or triplex for Dana Packer, because that's all I need, you're absolutely correct, that's all I need. But am I gonna do that? No.
Right.
You know.
It's not what you want.
Yeah, we know not everybody wants to downsize. So even when we see a gap in some of our communities, like the gap that I mentioned here in Newbury, we know that everybody that exists in that 1 or 2 person household. My parents, they are empty nesters too. They live in a 4-bedroom home. They don't want to downsize anymore. That's fine. What we want to make sure is that there's options for folks that do want to downsize and are looking to downsize. What the data tells us in that significant gap is that right now there really isn't much ability for them to downsize if they want. So we certainly expect people to want to stay in their homes, and we would encourage that, and I think we want folks to be able to age in place. We also want options for folks that want to move out and downsize. That's the consideration that we have with that. Yeah.
I get it.
And we've certainly, received emails from people very concerned about the housing, and precisely for that reason, they want to be able to downsize, stay in the community, stay with their friends, and there's no place to do it.
And by the same token, you also want affordable housing so that our teachers and police officers and people who work in the town can also afford to live here too, and an option for starter homes.
Certainly.
Yeah, I thought that was a good comment that Scott made. That was a perfect layup for this discussion. And even think about some of the younger people, some of your kids probably, do they have an option to live in the community where they grew up? And I think that's a challenging proposition for some of
They
those
don't.
folks now. Right.
They don't.
So this is another flip to that is, yeah, it might be folks, homes for downsizing, but at the same time, it also could be opportunities for folks who are just starting into their life cycle and wanting to start to build some wealth.
And we talk about the backlog too, and kind of the domino effect in addition to that, where if you have folks that want to downsize that are empty nesters, if they can't downsize and they want to, they're holding on to a 4-bedroom house that a new family may be able to move into. So that creates a backlog on the other end too. So there's all these moving pieces that are challenging when you have the shortage that we do a little bit.
And even though affordable is only one component of what we're talking about, just so everyone's on the same page, could you just describe what that number means for our community?
Yeah, so I'll give you estimates. I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head. However, Newbury's in the greater Boston area median income when they calculate an affordable unit. And so for a 1-bedroom, for a single person household, I believe the income threshold is like $80,000. Can anybody back me up on that around there? And so that's at 80% of the area median income. So Newbury's area median income is calculated at about $100,000 for a household. So if you make up to 80% of that, you can qualify for an affordable unit for a 1-person household. So that's $80,000 a year. If you're a 2-person household, the threshold gets a little higher, 3, 4, a little bit higher. And then your rent on that apartment, I think it's around $1,600 for a 1-bedroom, maybe $1,700. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's not cheap.
No.
But it's certainly not the
It's
$2,200 we see a lot of 1-bedrooms today.
No, they are. 2,500.
Yeah. As someone renting in this region, I know very well how expensive the market rate units are. So it's not cheap compared to what I think some folks may pay in their mortgage, but it's certainly more affordable than most.
So when we say affordable, we're talking about working families trying to survive in an environment that is very, very hard to afford. So I think we need to continue to get that message out, what affordable means for our community.
And we talked about that with the planning board, so I'm glad you brought it up when we had that meeting, and teachers, firefighters, et cetera, you know, even just folks working in town, having that affordability option.
I think there's a distinction between affordable housing and low-income housing. And that's what we need to use the right language.
Right.
Because this is not low-income housing.
Correct.
It's not tenement living, it's none of that.
Right, I mean, Scott used the term workforce housing, so that's really,
That's a healthy term, isn't it?
It's funny
Yeah.
when you think
Yeah.
about it, what was the name of the development, I'm drawing a blank, that was gonna be on the JRM property?
the village at Little River.
The village at Little River. It was like before its time, I guess, huh?
Right. We talked about that a lot, I think, over the past, during the zoning
My
and, yeah,
God.
yeah.
And you would have had a shopping component next to a housing
Trader
component.
Joe's.
So I think we're gonna talk a little bit about some of those districts we've been looking at, and all these questions and comments are great, keep them coming, you know, as Kayla presents a little bit. The point of this is for you all to understand, cause like we said, this has to go to town meeting. You're all gonna make a decision on your support, yay or nay on this, and we want you to have a full understanding so you can, you know, talk to your constituents as this moves forward. So feel free, we know you're not being adversarial with any of the questions, so keep peppering them at us. Kayla, I'll hand it over to you.
Alright, hi everyone. So we're gonna go over a couple of the options that we've pulled together for everybody here to show a couple options for potential compliance. So just wanna highlight a few things right off the bat. We do have a lot of options here. The goal really is to, you know, take a look at all of them and think about where you want to kind of prioritize. We're really looking to tailor this down a bit. Right now we have 5 proposed districts. And I also want to highlight, we'll talk a little bit about dimensional parameters in a few minutes. But each of these districts, we have some flexibility to have some different parameters in each of these sub-districts. We have 2 kind of main areas of town we're looking at. One area we're calling Newbury North, another we're calling Newbury South. So Newbury North, we have 3 different areas kind of near the commuter rail station that we're looking at. Newbury South, we're looking at some areas, one including where we're standing right now. The idea being that the final sub-districts that we you know, determine might be the best options, that will be included in one overlay district. Any of the underlying zoning there would of course still apply. This is just kind of an overlay over these areas. So first we're gonna go through Newbury North. Oh, actually, sorry, we're gonna go through the dimensional parameters. So for all these districts, just to start off, these are the dimensional requirements we are looking at. I also do wanna mention, along with the districts, we are also just in a draft form for this. So of course, any ideas you have, anything you'd like to see changed, this is still in draft form, so we're still working with this. I will say a couple things to highlight. We are capping the maximum building height at 3 stories. We're keeping some of your setbacks consistent with other areas of your bylaw, and we also are taking some steps to preserve open space. We have a 40% minimum open space requirement here, and this is again based on other areas of your bylaw. So just want to give you a snapshot of something we're looking at. And as I mentioned before too, right now we have all of these dimensional parameters for each of the sub-districts, but if you want to kind of pick and choose and change some of the parameters, maybe you want to see 2 stories in one area compared to 3, we definitely have some flexibility here for that.
Kayla, before you,
Sure.
are those full-size parking lots, parking spaces, or are they compact car?
I believe they're like normal size.
Full-size.
Yeah, and I believe the average of 1.5 spaces, when we actually are doing your bylaw, it's gonna be more like studio and 1 bedrooms would be 1 parking space, 2 bedrooms and more would be 2 spaces, that's why it averages out there.
And Kayla, when you talk about 3 stories, are you assigning what, is it 12 or 13 feet per story?
That's a good question.
Yeah, it was about 35, 40 feet.
Right, so when we looked at this previously for something else, sort of 12 feet floor to floor seems to be kind of good average story height.
Is that what we are in our
What's our bylaw now?
Yeah.
We don't define story height. We have 35 feet from mean grade to mean height of the highest roof
Right.
is our
Would this fit?
height requirement.
Which I think is 35 feet, isn't it?
Yeah. So we're staying consistent with what your current zoning bylaw is.
Just wanna say this before I forget it. We kind of need to have this being, if it's not gonna be in alignment with the current bylaw, we need to make the change to the other bylaw at the same time, I would think, because we can't have bylaws conflicting, because we get into trouble that way.
Well, this is, as Kayla said, this is gonna be an overlay district on top of the underlying. So, I don't think we'll certainly take a look at it, but I don't think it's necessary to make them
Align?
it's the same. I mean, it's the overlay, it's like the Plum Island Overlay District
Okay.
is on top of the agricultural residential district, and they have some different dimensional parameters.
Okay.
So it would be similar to that.
But they should have deference to the, original. I wouldn't wanna see something go up like 10 or 12 feet,
Right, I mean, right.
because that's gonna throw what we have for available equipment and different things out of perspective.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we're looking at capping it at 3 stories.
Yeah, I believe when we first started working with this, when we originally were looking at, because the way we do this, we have a tool we use in order to see, kind of final outputs to make sure you're in compliance. When we went through to initially look at some options, we pulled a lot of the parameters directly from the existing bylaw, just as a starting off point. So we did definitely take a look at what you already have and kind of base this off of that.
Okay.
Yeah, and the setback requirements and the minimum lot size are both consistent with the underlying zoning.
Martha, are these proposed building places or sites owned by people now?
Yeah.
How would we get that land? Would they sell it?
It's up to them.
Would it be eminent, no eminent domain?
No, it's up to them. I mean,
They don't have to.
right, it would
We
be.
just have to zone them, we just have to zone the
Right.
land.
See, I
Yeah.
keep putting more from my old planning board times, for some reason,
Yeah.
I think I've given too much credibility to zoning, all right,
It's
that'll
a-
shut me up.
Yeah, it's a
Good-
situation
good
where you have
Dana, that was good.
Yeah, all we have to do is zone the
No, that's
property.
fine.
And who
I'll-
doesn't
I'll
get,
be
who
quiet
matters
for a while.
who owns
And
it?
you know what, it might
good.
value add to who owns it too.
No, it was good.
We
No, and
don't, we don't know.
Yeah, certainly. And it's a situation where if anything happens, you're gonna have a willing seller and a willing
Good,
buyer.
perfect. And Dana's right.
And we're
I
not
was
forcing
thinking,
anybody
yep.
to do anything.
Okay. Ready? Yeah. So this is just a kind of zoomed out look of where your potential overlay district could be. So as you can see at the top there, we have that area we're calling Newbury North. And then the bottom area, we have Newbury South. Of course, we are going to zoom in just a second, look at them individually, but just want to give that little snapshot there of all of the 5 districts and where they're generally located. So 2 on the bottom and then 3 towards the north area up there. So this is the Newbury North area that we are looking at. So just to orient yourselves a little bit, if you can see that little icon up there, that's on the way to the Newburyport commuter rail. It's a little cut off by the picture, but it is up there. And then of course, right along where that A is, that's gonna be Route 1. And then where the B district is, we have the elementary school right there as well. So this is just a snapshot of that Newbury North area, and we're gonna talk about them individually. So for Newbury North, this is what we're calling Subdistrict A. It's a 22-acre district right along Route 1. The idea with this district, and again, for all of these districts, we really tried to look at a lot of those, going back to a couple slides ago, some of those factors, those best zoning practices. So of course, this has some pretty good access to the Newburyport commuter rail station. Definitely have some potential for the bike and pedestrian access as well as driving. You also do have a couple smaller parcels here, which we say we allow for gentle density. The way we kind of describe gentle density is, especially in the context of this legislation, if you were to take say a large parcel, 20, 30 acres or something, and just zone over that one parcel. It's kind of like we just talked about. If someone wanted to sell that parcel, you're gonna see, maybe those kind of shoebox-like apartments. But if you're using smaller parcels, a developer wouldn't be able to do that. They'd have to buy up all the little parcels at one time. So you're gonna see something where maybe, one site gets developed and then a few years later something else gets developed, but it wouldn't necessarily happen all at once. And of course, we also see this as a gateway improvement opportunity. This is kind of on the border going into town. So definitely something to highlight there. And of course, if you guys have any thoughts about specific districts, we can definitely discuss them as we go along. But we can also hold off towards the end and go over them all at once if you'd like. So for the next one, we have Newbury North Subdistrict B. This is going to be a 17-acre district. This is going to be walkable to the elementary school. It also does have some commuter rail access as well. It's very similar to the first area we're looking at, but this is actually kind of located in an area where there is some kind of multifamily housing. So thought that would be a good option for Newbury North as well.
Just to orient
Yeah.
myself a little more,
Mhm.
the previous slide, which Martha, you don't, good. What roads, Route 1 and?
So that's Route 1, and then the next one's going to be off of Hanover
That's
Street.
Route 1 in Hanover, right?
Yeah.
Hanover and Middle,
That's the
right,
intersection
right,
where the lights are.
Yeah.
So that,
The west box, I think, is where JRM used to be,
Yeah,
isn't
it's
it?
JRM.
Yeah.
and then the upper box is where we looked at for Town Hall once, right, Martha?
No, that's the lower one, so it's
Okay,
a
well,
JRM
okay,
parcel,
switch 'em
directly
around.
across
I
Route
got you.
1 is Newbury Animal
Perfect,
Hospital.
I'm going the wrong way.
And south of that is the old
Yep.
Holistic, where holistic used
right,
to be.
right.
Good, now I'm oriented, good,
Right.
thanks. Where are we here?
That's Newbury Elementary.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so kind of just to the right of where that first district was. All right, and this is going to be our Newbury North Subdistrict C. So something to mention here, kind of taking a look at the general process that we went through with this. Initially, we actually started off just looking at subdistricts A and B, but after talking with Martha and Kristen, working with the planning board, we looked at this option C as well as a potential good option for this district. So this is going to be a 12-acre district, also has some closeness to the commuter rail. We're also looking at some potential connections to Newburyport's water supply, as well as some potential future connections to the Border to Boston Trail, which should be going right up along that road. And just to orient yourselves as well, this is going to be right along Scotland Road, leading into Newburyport, so maybe some potential town gateway improvement opportunities as well.
Yeah, it's right at the end of Highfield and,
Highfield,
you know,
right.
just,
I can see that
yeah,
now, yep.
just south of the industrial park.
Right, so those were the 3 subdistricts for Newbury North. Now we're going to take a look at Newbury South. So as you can see here, these are 2 districts that are located right near 95 right there. So you have Subdistrict A, which is where we're standing right now, Kent Way, and then we have Subdistrict B right off of Central Street. So Subdistrict A, this is going to be a 10-acre district there. This is going to be, of course, walkable to Byfield Center, have access to 95, and is also connected to the Byfield Water District. We felt like this had a good potential as a district. These Newbury South districts, even though they're not necessarily located near the Newburyport commuter rail with that transit access, we do feel like it has some good transportation access just because the highway is right there. And very similar as well for Subdistrict B too. This has some additional potential for some walk and bike and connections to Byfield Center, as well as that additional access to 95. So these 2 districts as well are pretty similar with some of their amenities. So yeah, these are the 5 districts that we're looking at. Would love to hear some of your feedback. Again, just want to reiterate, these are a couple options we have for you all to look at. Would definitely love to hear any thoughts about if you want to prioritize certain areas over others. We can pretty much get you into compliance with any combination of these districts. So of course, would love to hear the feedback.
I think that's a very interesting point. We can use any combination of the districts to hit the threshold number. So it doesn't have to be saturated in one particular district. It could be a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit there. So each of these designs, which we'll get into, could look differently based on where they're going to be proposed.
Does like the 12-acre piece, that wouldn't handle it all anyway, or would it?
Well,
Well, I won't take that away.
I'm
so
sorry, could you repeat the question?
Oh, I was just thinking, did like the 12-acre piece or whatever, let's say this was, or 10 acres, can everything fit into that
Can one
locus?
parcel fit it for us?
Yeah, so you could do
All
it
these
with,
parcels would fit.
so it wouldn't be necessarily the one parcel, but it would be the one sub-district, yeah. So the way we've looked at it, we do have a tool that we use to, plugging in all your parameters, it'll kind of spit out a number to say you can get into compliance here. We can pretty much get you guys into compliance with a combination or any one of these. So it really depends on what you're looking for. Of course, you're gonna see, different, outputs depending on what you're looking at. But generally, yes, we can get you to compliance.
But I think Jeff's point was no one district or sub-district would fit the bill, right? It'd have to be a combination.
She did say it would.
You could, yeah, you could. We could look at a combination, but we could also, depending on what you're looking to do, if you want to focus one area. Something to mention, which has actually come up a couple times in some other communities. We could look at doing just one area of town. But if we're actually thinking about, the goal of this legislation, we want to see housing eventually be built. And the idea is if we use a combination, it gets you into compliance, but it also, if you have a developer that comes in and wants to build something, it gives a few options. Maybe there's one site that might not work for certain reasons. They have another site as an option to use. If you have just the one district, could just limit that. Just something to think about.
and as time went along, we could exceed that 154, depending if there was a developer and, a landowner that wanted to work collaboratively to make it happen. So this could be a building process to as opposed to a limited process.
How much extra space do we have out of the 5 districts that you created? In the parameters that we need to fall into is that 150% of what we need, or is there a number there that
Yeah.
what is it?
So the best way to describe it is all of these districts as a whole are totaling in about 70-ish acres. In order to get you into compliance, especially using that 15 units per acre minimum, you're only looking at about 15 acres total that you would need. I will also say that the tool that we use, it's very generous in the output. It basically takes the parcel and says under perfect conditions, so not necessarily taking into consideration, sewer constraints or water constraints, or, if there's certain elements to the site that might prohibit, or even hallways, for example. It really just looks at what is the absolute maximum capacity that you could build on that parcel, and it spits out a number to say this is the unit capacity. It actually works really well in your favor, because if the compliance model says it's gonna build out to this many units, we know that that's not an actual real world build out analysis. It's just saying under perfect conditions, what is the maximum that you could see? So even if we're zoning over these sites and getting you into compliance, you're not necessarily gonna see 154 units go in on one site.
And the other thing is the open space that is a component, which is 40%.
40%, yes.
So that's very,
Question, because I'll get asked it. Because some of the phraseology is that, when we're ready to downsize, we're gonna go there to stay in Newbury, but I will get asked, at maximum capacity, what would probably the population of a full build-out unit be? Meaning, how many people would be in this if one of these were totally built out to capacity, or 2 of them were 150 units? How many people?
So I guess it depends.
Because they're 1 and 2, but just take.
Yeah, in terms of the actual.
300 or 500 people to our population?
It really depends. It depends on the builder, depending on how many bedrooms they're building. I don't believe with the bedrooms, there's a.
I mean, typically we see the developments that go in today, we see them at studio 1 and 2 bedrooms and maybe a few 3 bedrooms. The 3 bedrooms are what add the most to a population and are what add when you start to see school children. But more often than not, we see primarily studio 1 and 2 bedrooms. Those are all 1 to 2 people in a unit. So if you had 150 units at 1 to 2 people, maybe you're talking 300 people. Assuming 100% occupancy, you know, there's a lot of stuff, like Kayla said, it's so variable.
theoretical.
Maybe a developer wants to put in all studios, maybe they wanna put in all 3 bedrooms. I doubt that would happen, but that option's there, we're not restricting it. So, yeah.
Which makes sense.
I have a quick question. All of the areas where the districts are, the one that's in Newbury North, that's 12 acres, is it? Is that the largest of the districts? And
So it's actually the smallest, so there's
The,
22 acres.
elementary school?
The 17-acre one.
Yeah.
17-acre
Yes.
one. Have all of these been vetted that all of the acreage can be used?
That's a great question, actually. So that is a calculation that we do. So essentially, we look at what's called excluded land. And it gets taken out essentially when they calculate it. So it's an additional calculation that gets done. So think, wetlands, for example. That's not considered as part of your kind of developable land in that area. So when we look at that density, when we look at trying to meet that 15 units per acre minimum, it takes that land out of consideration and says, out of all the land that in the parcel, what is developable, and that is how the density is determined.
Okay.
So it does take that into consideration.
We don't have to think about things like perking. We just have to think about where it could potentially go. That's up to a developer.
Yeah, and that particular district, I think, to be developed, you'd need Newburyport Water and Sewer, I believe.
And I think one of the things that, just because it's far away and hard to see, when we're talking about the district as a whole, that's 17 acres of multiple parcels. You can probably see the small yellow lines are separate parcels. So again, going back to that, how developable is it? If they wanted to develop the whole site, they'd have to buy all 3 parcels within that actual site itself.
And just to add to what you just said, I went to one of the Whittier briefings. Whittier was trying to tie into Haverhill. And you look at like what's going on with the Merrimack River and the sewerage and how many times, the rain runoff and how many times Lawrence and Haverhill, and you go right down the Merrimack River, how many times they're dumping raw sewage into the river because they've exceeded their capacity. So you can say we could just tie into Newburyport, but Newburyport might not be able to handle it.
Yeah, the point I was trying to make is that we don't have to.
But I understand, that's not our problem.
It's not our problem, exactly.
Right, I get that part.
But again, we're trying to align where things might potentially work the best.
There's discussion on some of those people that are dumping into the river to have a moratorium on building until they can come into compliance. Wouldn't that change things?
Yeah.
But a lot of those combined sewage overflows are
They can
from,
be fixed.
yeah, they can be fixed, but a lot of them are from stormwater runoff.
That's exactly what it is. Yep.
Right, that's
what it all is.
yeah.
So the point here being that a developer might come in and they say, oh, there's no water hookup here. It's not financially feasible for me to build that many units. I'm only gonna build 10, I'm not gonna build 50. And so like you all were saying, you don't need to care about that because you're just doing the zoning. They might come in and say, oh, I gotta put in a septic system. I can only do 4 units, I can't do
So-
50, fine.
So that's a good point.
Mhm.
What is the likelihood of the Commonwealth coming back and saying to these communities, well, you were supposed to build this, we still have a housing crisis. You didn't do what you said you were gonna do, you were supposed to do this. I mean,
They're just requiring zoning.
well, for now.
Right, and they've provided a tool, as Kayla said, for us to, kind of plug all these things into it and get a number out. And the zoning needs to be in compliance with that, but there
I
hasn't
think an
been.
important thing to think about with that is that it wouldn't allow a change in the regulation, it would require a change in statute, and that'd be an act of the legislature, so you would have to, I'm sure you all know your representatives and senators, they would have to vote on that, it'd have to be a change in statute if they were to require building. At this time, we don't see it happening, it could, I don't work for the state, so I couldn't tell you, don't directly work for the governor, but it would take an act of the legislature to change that.
And that question's been asked before, and I think that it is an astute question to ask because it's a double-edged sword. it's also an opportunity for the town to envision what might be, either through a developer proactively working with the community to develop something, or the state twisting the screws a bit.
Right.
So we as a community, where would we want to see this continue to develop and taking advantage of some of these opportunities to connect to transit? And I think that's where maybe we flip this a little bit and say, okay, if all things went well, what would this look like if it was successful? And where would this be ideally situated from your perspective? And so imagining that scenario, whether it happened voluntarily or the state was really pushing this issue, what do we, the community, want to see emerge in these different locations, and where, frankly?
Proactive is the word there, being proactive.
Yeah.
So I know that this is kind of our first pass of looking at this, but are there any initial reaction, are there any specific areas that you think we don't like, for example? We think that all of these districts do have their own merits. Some might be more beneficial than others, but right now we are definitely looking to kind of tailor down and get a sense of what might work the best if we do have kind of a top 3 or top 2 or whatever. So if there are any thoughts about anything that you, right off the bat, you say, maybe this isn't the best area to look at, that's really where we're at in terms of getting feedback.
I'm gonna jump right to the annual town meeting.
Yeah.
Coming this May.
That's what I would think
And
about too.
I can just tell you that we probably need to come up with more than one option.
Of course.
You know, that we can present, and we probably are gonna need to do a few roadshows in town to present the different options, so that when we put it on the warrant and the vote comes up, people, they've already seen it, they've already heard about it, they're comfortable with it, they know what the options are, and that's gonna be our job to do that.
So of these potential overlay districts that we should just went over, are there any that you have any questions on, you think would be a good fit, would think would be a not so good fit?
I'll tell you though, what Dana just said is very important, because I think I was on the planning board for 7 years ago. And I certainly looked at zoning in my mind tonight. Maybe the mind's getting older, but I don't know, in a whole different light that I'm sure other people are gonna do. So the importance of having this be more seamless than arduous is gonna be like what Dana said, and have more understanding. And Gerard, I wanna really compliment you on the team tonight.
Yeah, they're doing great.
It was super.
I said they were expert, did I not? And just to sort of offer this, if Martha and Kristen can't shuttle this alone, we're happy to provide our staff's assistance to help with some of that public outreach and
Thank you.
engagement. Anything that we can do to support. It really needs to come from you folks first in helping guide this, but then we can support you in the wheres and the what does it look likes, and the, the proactive planning to get ahead of some of the public. I've been at our town meetings, so I know what those look like, and
Sorry, I cut you off.
I was just saying, I've been at the town meetings, I know how those can go, so we wanna present, as Dana said, our best light on this that we can.
Yeah,
I think one of the most important things is terminology.
Mhm.
How do we explain to people what this is? 4-B housing, affordable housing, low-income housing, everyone's going, I don't want any of that. They don't understand the terms.
Mhm.
We need to explain very carefully
You're right.
what those terms are, so that right off the bat, people have an awareness. Now, your education piece is huge. People need to know what it all means to them and why this is important to the town. It's about control.
Mhm.
The town will have control over what happens if, in fact, we step in on time and we have a good plan. That's our job.
And the town has been very fortunate to be the recipient of a lot of grants, small bridge grants,
Right,
culvert grants.
yeah,
And I don't wanna see that
right.
go away.
And so to the roadshow comment, the first roadshow is on Monday night, what are we
Monday.
thinking?
Yep.
Monday night will be part of presenting to the public, and if any of you are able to make it, I would say, please come and afterwards say to us, you gotta rephrase that next time you talk to people, because every town is different and we try to customize what we're saying depending on the community, but we know your residents are gonna need a different approach than what every other town's gonna need, so if you're able to come, we're open ears if you say that didn't quite go over well, do it this way next time, you know?
That's at the library, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Monday, the library, what time?
6:30.
6:30.
And of course, invite other residents and neighbors as well, more the merrier.
Just to add one more thing, you made a really good point in that, you know, what if we get to the point where the state says, you're gonna have to do something? And we lose that control that you're talking about, and they say, it's gonna be here, here, and here, and we, wait a minute, that's not where we want it, sorry, you guys had your chance. And so I think, Pete, you made this comment, and it's like, how do we proactively make these decisions and try and do the education to get out in front of this so that we don't put ourselves in that place where the state's like, you didn't do what we asked, now it's our turn to show you how it's gonna be done, and you lose that control. That's, I think, a fear that I would have also.
Anyone who comes to one of these presentations already has a little piece in their brain that tells them what we're talking about in advance.
Right.
So their perception is what we're gonna be dealing with. It's not easy, it's gonna be hard.
Yeah.
But that's why we have to look at that as sort of an obstacle that we can get over. Tailoring it to the town, I'm not sure. I think it's really, what is the perception of each, or the majority of Newbury residents about what this means?
It'll be
I don't
interesting.
get it, you know, they say, I don't get it. I don't want all these big monstrous tacky looking buildings all over my town. Ain't gonna be happening.
You're right. The neighbor, you know, the neighborhoods, the individual neighborhoods are the ones that are gonna go crazy over this.
Right.
But wait till you see some of the imagery.
No,
So-
That's where the fit comes in.
Yeah.
Well,
So the
what's
one
gonna
thing,
happen though is people worry maybe, but there's all kinds of backdrops and things. They worry about traffic, they worry about those things too, but question, could the state ever be such that they would have the ability to come in and pick our zoning for us?
Isn't that what 40B is? To some
Well,
extent?
But they're not picking the spot.
They're not picking, but you've effectively lost control in that scenario.
You
and
mean
the developer
because
is
they
picking.
added like a 10% or something.
Correct, right.
until we meet that threshold, we're
But
at
I
the,
mean.
I'm just using it as an
I'm
example.
saying, cause we've
It's a
been
good
at
one.
that a while. I mean, when the state comes in and picks our zoning, then it's time. You know.
Then we're
And that's
going
also
with
what
pitchforks.
if, you know, we don't know that's gonna happen, but you wanna make sure that that doesn't happen.
so I have a concern about just one of these, and I think it
We have
could,
options now.
I think it could be addressed, with the type of building, but I'm a little concerned about that C, that number C, that lot C, because it abuts Essex County Greenbelt. I know on one side of it is the industrial park, but when you go down Scotland Road and you come into town that way, it's quite bucolic. It's part of that great pasture. It's got wet meadows over there. You have, you know, it's rural. You have cows.
Very agricultural.
Very agricultural and very, very rural. So I think that this encroaches a little bit on that. And
But you could throw a stone to the industrial park.
you could, but there's the river, right, the little river right there blocks
You could
it.
throw a stone.
And a lot,
Um,
and a lot of that sea is wet,
Yeah, it always has
it
been.
really is.
Well, because of the
Again,
rivers there.
all that we're doing is we're zoning. We're
Yep,
not
we
building.
can't get that through our head, Kelly.
You know, that's it. We're just saying, hey, this is where it could work. Good luck, Mr. Developer, Miss Developer.
But this is very helpful feedback, because something that we're thinking about as well, as I'm sure you guys are, is, you know, getting this to town meeting. So really appreciate all of your feedback. Looking at, you know, District C over there, it could be something where we, you know, keep it in and say, hey, let's just bring this to town meeting and see what the voters think. But if you all feel strongly that it's not necessarily the best option, and you feel like maybe residents are gonna get in the weeds about why that specific area isn't that great, that's what we're trying to get feedback on now. You know, we wanna bring a proposal to town meeting that we feel confident will pass. And that's what we're looking for your feedback for. So that's really good to know that that district, there's some concerns there.
Oh, and I'm only one person,
Sure, of course, yeah.
so, I really like B section, right near the school. I think that would be great for, small apartments, kids can walk to school. You never see that. I mean, Triton wouldn't allow that anyways, they'd make them get on a bus, but I'm just saying. And I like that section, I like the A, cause it's right near Route 1. And I think,
train.
yeah, and the train, and I think that other two sections south of town, the only one that made me a little uncomfortable and itchy is that C, only because of the pasture and what it is.
That's the smallest anyway, right? Is that the smallest?
Out of these three, that's the smallest of just Newbury North. I believe the other two parcels to the south are a little smaller.
When I'm looking at B, is the lot right next to it, I can't really see, is that the school?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah.
directly next to
I
it.
don't
Point 'em out
know,
the school.
This,
I don't,
this is Newbury Elementary right here.
I mean,
This
I-
round part, that's
Yeah.
where we used to be called the
That's what I'm
round
thinking.
school.
and I'm not sure that I'm
This is Stevie Noyce's
Yep,
complex.
and that's Newburyport print behind there.
Yeah.
Buildings behind. I'm not sure I think that kind of density right next to the school is a great idea either, but that's just me.
Well, the other point I want to bring up is like, our own infrastructure as we develop this and as we want to try and encourage people to come in here and build these kinds of places on these sites, when you're talking about things like, sidewalks, like is the sidewalk there? Are we gonna put the sidewalk there before we build the house? Or are
no,
we gonna
can
put it
we-
there after we build the house?
Can we make them put the sidewalk in?
Well, you
Going
can.
back to what Pete said, we're getting way on
We're
another
just
train.
zoning,
Right.
just think zoning, guys, don't think buildings. Cause there might be 4 here and 12 there.
But I think that's actually a really good point. You absolutely can require sidewalks when the parcel is being developed. That could,
As part of the site plan
as
review.
part of the design
Yeah, well, I mean, you
guidelines,
could
as
say,
part
you
of
can
what-
say, well, your kids can walk to school. Well, they can't walk to school if there's no sidewalks.
Exactly.
So anyway, okay, let's
Any thoughts?
move on.
And then thoughts on the South District at all? Just be curious before we did, you can go back one slide, Martha, so we can see both of them. Any thoughts on these two?
What's that? See where B is?
Mhm.
To the, I guess, the northeast corner, is that Pearson's Plaza?
Yeah,
Is that what that is?
Pearson Plaza's right here. Yep.
Okay,
And then this is that, I forget the name of that building right
The
there, but
Apple
we
Building?
actually looked at that site for the town hall.
the Apple Building.
And I wanna say, where's Locken Road? Locken Road must be somewhere in here?
Yeah, it's farther,
It's further down.
yeah, it's farther down.
But is it in B?
No,
No,
no.
it's, so it's down here?
Right, B is adjacent to the fire station, and then Larkin Road is right, you can.
So B is
Oh,
adjacent.
this is the fire station
Here's
right
the
here.
fire station,
Yeah,
so
okay.
here's Larkin.
Yeah, Locken Road's right here, okay.
Man, we got lousy soils in our town. Fire station couldn't even get a perk.
Well, does anybody have any comments on these?
We can look at some pictures and talk about the designs a little bit, and then we can come back to this as you all think about it a little bit more, if that's helpful.
We're gonna marinate on this for a while.
Yeah,
Yeah, of course.
this isn't your last opportunity. So, a couple of things, you can go to the next slide there, Martha, that we wanna talk about are some additional bylaw components. So this is that affordability metric, so going back to some terminology again, let's think about how we're approaching that, and the design guidelines. So, number one, requiring affordability. And so this is, these are units that can go on what's called your subsidized housing inventory. Your subsidized housing inventory is what counts towards that 10% threshold for 40B. And so these are designated affordable units. The definition of affordable here are for individuals making up that 80% area median income that I had referenced before. So in Newbury, for a one-person household, that's about $80,000, very high threshold. So when we're talking affordability, we're talking really workforce housing, and your everyday resident could very well be here. We can require up to 10%, excuse me, of the units in the development to be at that affordability threshold. We cannot go above that for the purposes of this law, but we can require up to 10%, so that's what we're proposing. As of right now, there's a couple of things that we are considering, and that we are interested in feedback on if you have any thoughts. And so the trick with this comes where the threshold is for when you start requiring affordable units. How many units is a developer building before you say, now you have to start incorporating affordability? So for example, some communities say, once you build 20 units or more, 10% have to be affordable. Some communities say, once you build 10 units or more, 10% have to be affordable. Some communities, there's no threshold. Once you build 3 units, they do a decimal percentage and they say you have to put in at least 1 unit once you get to 3 units. The reason why there's so much differentiation there is because of just the economic feasibility of a developer actually incorporating an affordable unit, and they're still gonna get a return on their investment. So as your new planning board member will probably be able to comment on better than myself, when you're building more units, it's more feasible for your return on investment to include affordable units because your rent is lower for only some units, but then you have a ton of market rate units versus we see in some instances when your threshold's low, let's say you start requiring it at 7 units, a developer may come in and say, well, it's not feasible for me at all to build 7 units and one of them has to be affordable. I'm not gonna get a return on my investment, so I'm building nothing. And so we wanna make sure that there's still some incentive for a developer to build if we want affordability. So as of right now, what we're putting in the bylaw in our drafts is requiring that threshold to start at 10 units. So if you have a 10-unit development or greater, they would have to include 10%. We can go lower. This is probably about average. Cities will probably go 20 units because they see commonly 20-unit developments for it's fine. We're not going to do that here in Newbury because you're not going to see many 20-unit developments. And so right now we're just pinning it at 10, but that's not a number set in stone. So interested if there's questions about affordability in general because like we said, there's a lot of terms and jargon and math here.
I thought the whole purpose of this was affordability.
No, so this is only primarily about market rate housing, and actually initially it could only be market rate housing.
No, but it's market rate housing, but
But
we
it's
just
not-
had that whole spiel about how I live in a big house and I'm only there by myself and my husband, and my kids can't afford to buy a house in here.
It's really diversity of housing.
But it's not 40B.
No, I know it's not 40B,
But-
but I thought the whole purpose of this is to require these communities near rail transits to build housing that people can afford.
Yeah, so this comes back to your definitions of affordability. And so we can't income restrict all of the units, but when we think about small A affordable, so things that aren't necessarily restrictive, but on the market, they tend to be more affordable than other units on the market, that tends to be smaller units. So sometimes people throw out, it's gonna be affordable because it's a smaller unit, so it's gonna be cheaper. Just balancing out the difference in housing stock versus demand, as you create more units, that supply-demand effect can help level
So
things off.
this is
But
years
this
away.
situation,
This is years away.
yes, very much so.
If ever.
Yeah.
If ever.
We can only require that much
Ian,
affordability.
Gerard or Kayla, how do they, and Martha, if someone wants to come in and build 20 to 40 units, have you guys figured out how they don't come in and pick the best place on the lot and chop the rest up and make it unbuildable? No. Because it's zoning.
Because they gotta buy it anyway.
No, because it's zoning, but I mean, you could have something like that zoned and someone comes in and wants to build 10 units or 20 units within these guidelines of zoning, and they're gonna take that whole piece right off the market because they'll chop it up.
What's the effect of chopping it up? I'm trying to
Chopping it up meaning putting it right in the middle of where someone else might wanna do something bigger, cause the lot
Yeah.
is short.
And that's fine. It doesn't matter. If they come in and they say, I'm gonna buy this 10-acre parcel and
I
only
mean,
put
the
one unit
state
here.
can't ask us to
Nope.
now, because that happened, go find other housing.
Nope, we're just talking about zoning.
That was my point in the beginning.
Zoning.
We don't need to think at all about building here.
Zoning.
It does not matter what gets built.
These aren't,
No,
these
no,
aren't
you-
40Bs.
No,
Okay.
no.
No, but it is providing direction for the town to go in,
Yep.
in building. So we're not building the homes, we're zoning for the homes. And so you know, watch out what you wish for because you just might get it.
There very likely may be construction that comes out of this. It's just a question of how much and it.
And we gotta make sure that it's what we want.
So continue with your
know what I
presentation
mean?
because that's.
Sure, if you wanna go to the next slide, when we talk a little bit about design guidelines, I'm gonna do this slide and then show pictures after this. And so when we incorporate this bylaw, one of the things we think about is site plan review. You still have site plan review available to you with this bylaw. And as a part of site plan review, we're proposing that you have what we call design guidelines. And so these are elements of the bylaw that tell the developer the type of construction that the town wants to see and how we want that construction to look. And this is in an attempt to avoid a box-like structure. If you think about right next to the Newburyport commuter rail station on Boston Way, those 2 apartment buildings that went up recently, we're looking to avoid that. And that is done through design guidelines. When we say, don't just build a box, build it like this. These are some sample elements that we're thinking about including in those design guidelines. Things like pitched roofs instead of flat roofs. We wanna make sure that there's pitched roofs as a part of the buildings. Larger buildings, if you have larger massing, varying roof lines so that you're not looking at the same thing. When you vary those roof lines, it looks like the building may be a little bit smaller in reality. If multiple buildings, looking at a variety of building types, maybe one building is 2 stories, another building is 3 stories. So seeing some varying so that there's more of a neighborhood feel than the same type of building everywhere across the site. Variation in facade. So if we're looking at the front of a building, one of the things we can do is we can say, if your building is, let's say, over 30 feet long, we want you to have different elements across the length of that building. So maybe that's a bay window somewhere through, maybe it's a different canopy, different elements that make it look like that facade is broken up and it isn't one long uniform line or wall. Landscape buffers or built buffers between the actual development site and abutting landowners and parcels. So making sure that the sight lines from outside of the property are not disturbed so that you can't see the entirety of the development from being in a different parcel, so making sure they're putting some landscapes or other buffers in the area. We talked about building sidewalks earlier, so asking for pedestrian connections to the surrounding neighborhoods, making sure that it's able not only for cars, but also for pedestrians and other uses to get out of their housing and around into the surrounding neighborhood. And then finally, one of the other things we talk about is smaller scale buildings on the front of the road, taller at the back of the lot. So making sure, again, that sight line when you're maybe driving by the property, you'll be able to see a smaller building up front so it's not as scary and your taller ones are maybe hidden. Again, when we think taller, once again, we're saying 3 stories. So maybe you're 2 stories up front, you're 3 stories behind. I'm gonna show you some pictures.
Do design guidelines in zoning, once again in my head, do you have words like should?
Yes.
Or is there words like can't?
So there's only so far we can go with requirements. However, with design guidelines, it often errs on the side of you're gonna have an easier time getting your permit if you follow these design guidelines. And so more often than not, and when I say more often than not, I mean most of the time, the developers are following the design guidelines. There's only so much we can require. A lot of the list I just put up there are things that you can say should on. Some of them are a may. I don't remember off the top of my head how we have it written right now. But things like the roof line and the variation in the building facade itself, those things you can be a bit more hard on than some of the other things. Like you'll notice in here is not the type of material. It would be very hard for us to get you in compliance and require them to use brick or wood siding instead of vinyl siding. Some design guidelines include that in other communities. That's more of a may than a should, and that's why we don't really have it in here because it'd be cost prohibitive for a developer.
But I guess guidelines are guidelines, they're not regulations.
Yeah, so they'd have to go through site plan review, and essentially they have to, if they're not following the design guidelines, they have to explain to the planning board or the permitting authority why they're not following the design guidelines. So they have to come with a plan and say, here's how we've gone along with all of your design guidelines, here's where we have not, this is why not, and then the planning board or the permitting authority has to review that and give their thoughts and feedback and have continual conversations as a part of the actual permitting process. And some communities you see design guidelines that are 10, 15 pages long, and often that's in an attempt to say, we know you can't follow all 15, but we want to give you a vision in a sense of what we want and try and hit these, and these are the things we're thinking about. So trying to keep it simple here so developers know the key things for you to hit and what you're looking at. And we can include pictures in design guidelines as well. I'm not saying these pictures in the next slide are the things that we're necessarily going to include, but other communities sometimes say like, build this, not that. So they'll show a picture of something they like, then they show a picture of something they don't like, so the developer gets an idea of what you're looking at. And so it's a little bit hard to see, I think, up there on the screen, but these are different types of multifamily housing that we see in Massachusetts and even in the region. And these are all at that 15 units per acre requirement. So these meet the density, and they may be a type of housing that is possible. The picture up top, that one in Georgetown, it's not a great picture because the site itself, that's actually set back from the road. This is right on 97 or 133 in downtown Georgetown. And so those are a group of condos that went up recently, and they're set back from the actual road itself. On the bottom left there is Natick, and so this is an example of smaller buildings being up front. At the foreground of that picture is the main road, and then you can kind of see, and we have better pictures that Kristen and Martha can share with you all too. In the back of that picture are the 3-story and plus structures, so that's that idea of keeping the shorter structures up front and the larger structures in the back. And then on the right, bottom right there is an example in North Andover. This is a really small parcel that was converted into 6 units that actually exceeds the density required under the MBTA communities law. But it gets to that, I guess, gentle density idea of when you have a small parcel, that's really all there's not 10 of those all neighboring each other, it's just one in one neighborhood. Developer bought one plot and put that in there. So that is an example, again, of also following some of those design guidelines of a varying facade up front, so it's not just one, wide swath of siding, and you look at some different elements involved, the gabled roof line and different other elements. These are just 3 pictures. We have some others that aren't in this slideshow that we're happy to share with you that Martha and Kristen have been tracking down as well. But to give you an idea of what we are talking about more than what we're not talking about, those larger structures.
So you're really talking about, I can remember when the condominium first came to be, back in the 80s when they started condoing everything out. That was a step up for people. I know several of my friends bought condos when the buildings were condo. That was their first home when they were first married. And then they either sold the condo at a profit and bought a home, a single-family home.
Yeah.
But none of these that I see here, unless that Natick one looks like that, these all look like condominiums.
The Natick one is rental. I don't know the status of the other ones in the picture, but again, it comes down to what the developer wants to build. They could build condo ownership units, or they could build rental, but it would look the same. I mean, I'm not guaranteeing that all the developments are gonna look like this, but the idea is the same. They would build it in this structure, and maybe it's for rent, maybe it's for ownership.
So I guess where I'm getting hung up is I'm not looking at a 1 to 2 bedroom home. I'm looking at single-family home.
You're looking at 1 to 2 bedroom. The ones on the top, I believe, are 3 bedrooms. The bottom right is actually 6 units in that building, and that's why it is the multifamily density required. And all of those units in that building are at max 2 bedrooms. And then the bottom left has a mix of 1, 2 bedrooms, and I think a couple 3, but it's mostly studio 1s and 2s. And the bottom left is, I believe, is maybe 200 units. I know that we were looking at that earlier. And the bottom right, like I said, is 6 units in that structure.
But it's not a home, it's not a single-family home.
Right, because we can't be talking about detached single family because that's not gonna be in compliance. So we have to be doing multifamily, and to meet that definition, you need a minimum of 3 units in a building. And
how did you describe that missed,
The missing middle.
the missing middle, right? Yeah, going back to that graphic at the beginning, on the left is what you're talking about, maybe with those starter homes. On the right with those bigger ones, this is in the middle. Exactly.
Okay.
and you're trying to steer clear of single-family, freestanding single-family.
Right, so to comply with the law, we have to allow multifamily. That being said, single family is still allowed. If a developer wants to come in and build a single family home, they can do that. However, to comply with the law, we have to allow multifamily by right, and so that's what we're giving examples of here. Yeah. So we're not prohibiting single family, we're not saying no more single family, only multifamily,
But
we're
I
saying.
can't see how you can get to that density requirement on single-family homes.
So you can't on single family detached, but they don't need to build at the density that we need to zone for. So we're zoning for it, however, they might come in and say, we're gonna build not at that density, that's fine.
Well, what happens when they build a 5-bedroom McMansion?
Great, well, not,
Well,
you know what I mean. Great as in, it doesn't matter in terms of compliance with the law. You've zoned for it,
Yeah.
Zoned.
all you're talking is zoning, yeah.
But I don't see how we're gonna get to that middle, like the zoning, I see zoning as a road to get to an end.
Yeah, so if you wanna get to this end, the idea being, right now, this is illegal to build in Newbury by right.
Oh, it is?
Yep,
You
That's
were
why
not
it's a
allowed to
zoning
build this,
concern.
and so what we're talking about is legalizing this type of construction, and so if we want
Right,
this
so
to
that's an
happen-
important piece we need to remember at town meeting.
Sure,
yep, we've always, yep.
and I think it's, it's giving more choice, I think as we've referenced, more options.
And then attracting developers that have an interest in doing it in a community like ours. That's the other piece of this.
Right.
But that's one thing
Newbury got
Newbury
a bad name.
has always resisted, you have to
Right.
remember that. I mean, way back when I was on the planning
Yeah.
board, there was a tremendous resistance
Yeah.
to multi-family homes. Be it as it may, things have changed now.
So that zoning will be built in, and it won't have to be something that would have to come up for the developer to come before the planning board or the zoning board to have it rezoned, it's already a done deal.
You could do it by right.
Okay.
Right,
And
and
like-
I think the important part of that too is that you're not gonna get any developers coming here to build anything like this because we don't even allow it right now.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, it's,
So maybe upfront, maybe the conversation is more, like, when you were saying earlier, I thought we were thinking this might be about affordability. What this is really about is legalizing housing that currently is not allowed. And so legalizing more options to allow more diversity of housing types for residents.
And a density that's not allowed,
Correct, yeah.
so.
Which I'm assuming the state's theory is that market forces will then
Yep.
create those.
that's what I envisioned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're zoning the
Listen
area
to
that it's
Johnny
going.
OneNote here, zoning.
Yeah.
And that is very true. I mean, we are having conversations with people who are saying, what's Newbury doing with MBTA zoning? So that the developers are following this.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why the state's initiative was sort of miraculous, really, to get all the towns to do this within a short period of time is the incentive to actually get the production happening. But it's a safety mechanism that it's only zoning for us. Then we have to set our design parameters, think about what matches with our master plan, think about what control we have, and try to think where the opportunities are, because we need the housing, we need it, we want it, but we want it to be in, synchronicity with what we all love about Newbury, which is the agriculture and the open space. And those kind of parameters actually give more control to the planning board in some ways than what we have now. We have mixed use allowed, like commercial and residential, but we don't have great design parameters around that. So there's a real opportunity here, and I think that's a great way to
Can we
have us
fix
all kind of
that?
talking about that.
Can we fix that? Like you said, can we fix that mixed use, making it better?
Yeah, and I think all these conversations we're having now about what are we have an architect as a planning director, like we have expertise among all of us. What are the things we can control with regulations? Is what we're getting what we want? Those are all, zoning is not an easy thing to pass at town meeting, but I think having these conversations is that opportunity to look at all the places where we can make change, so.
I mean, different type of housing is incredibly needed. I mean, as we talked about this, I think people are still gonna envision the multi-family look, but have like private ownership in each little slot. They probably won't consider it to be positive if someone comes in and builds that building in Newburyport on one of these buildings, one of these lots.
Right,
You
and
know,
that's why
a
we're,
big apartment complex with a flat roof.
right, and that's why we're setting up the design guidelines, so that what they do build is compatible with what's here and what kind of buildings that we would like
That's
to
the
see.
risk you have when it's zoning.
What's Newburyport doing about this?
They don't care.
We've been working with them a little bit. They only just started kind of going through everything, and their initial take was looking at right next to the commuter rail station. Where their 40R district is and where those new apartments went up recently. But they haven't made any big decisions about it yet.
Because they are a commuter rail community, they do have to zone a certain percentage of their total area has to be kind of within that commuter rail station. So depending on what they do, they might look at other areas of town, but they will have to zone for something near the commuter rail.
Has stuff that they have built, does that count now?
Yeah, so anything that's built, that's the state doesn't necessarily take a look at what's on the lot currently. If there is multifamily housing that exists, they're not necessarily gonna count, oh, there's 75 units in this building, that's the number connected to that parcel. It's gonna take a look at it. Essentially, if there's nothing that existed on that lot, what is the maximum capacity that could be built?
Again, it's just zoning, so it
It's
doesn't
just
matter what's built
potential,
there.
yeah.
We have, I think Lawrence has to zone for, a couple thousand units, and they have a lot of units right next to their commuter rail station already. All of that is not by right, so they basically have to change their zoning to say, these apartments are by right, nothing's gonna change in structure there, they just have to change their zoning to say everything's by right here, but nothing's gonna change in that community because they already have it built out, but they have to change the zoning to comply. It's all about zoning.
Meaning like Newburyport's allowed multifamily forever, right?
Right, but probably not by these parameters.
Another example is Haverhill as well. Haverhill allows for multifamily by right in a lot of these areas, so they've already submitted their compliance because they didn't essentially need to do anything. Their zoning already kind of had them in compliance, so that's what we're looking at here.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, so these are a few examples. There are plenty of other examples out there. This isn't to say that this is the only type of development that you would see, and you'll see these exactly. You can imagine like that Natick site down in the bottom left, that's a little bit of a bigger parcel, and might match some of the parcels that we're considering right now. That North Andover example on the bottom right, there's a couple parcels that are small that might fit around, and then that Georgetown example on the top, about a medium-sized parcel where there are some, in your area that might be like a wide variation, as I'm sure you can imagine, depending what developers will come forward with, but just trying to get you an idea of outside of what you might be used to with apartments, what are the possibilities? Martha, do you wanna, I don't think I have a slide after this except for questions. Well, this is next steps. I'll talk about the next steps here. As we mentioned, we're having a public forum on Monday. We're gonna do a Reader's Digest version of this presentation where we kind of explain things a bit more in detail, going back to that definitions and messaging, where we have some time to kind of introduce residents to this, because a lot of you have heard this before here, but a lot of residents haven't, so we're gonna do a bit more of an explanation around what exactly is going on here with residents, and then talk a little bit about some of the things that are being considered, and do those pictures and talk about what could this be envisioned as opposed to what you might be used to. Going forward, we're gonna be incorporating feedback both from residents and from you all into this bylaw as we continue to draft it. The goal is that we can have a drafted bylaw, this winter, so that your planning board and your select board, that both of you can go through your regular public hearing process for the articles in the town meeting warrant come spring. So what I would encourage is, number one, if you're able to, feel free to come on Monday. Number two, if you have thoughts and feedback, please feel free to either let us know or let Martha and Kristen know. We wanna hear your thoughts as this process moves forward. This isn't the last time that you're gonna hear from us. Hopefully that's not a bad thing. We will be back at some point, I'm sure, at least with the planning board as this moves forward. I'm happy to come back and talk with the select board as much as you all want as this process moves forward. But that's kind of the general timeline and that we're looking at over the next few months. Curious if anybody has questions about kind of our end goal here.
Well, you're planning on coming to our town meeting, right?
We can.
You're invited.
Yeah.
That's happened we haven't done it in other communities yet, but in other communities, they've had their consultant, we're acting in a consultant capacity here, go to the town meeting
I
and
think
talk.
it's gonna be important that town meeting members hear it from somebody other than us.
Yeah, and I think when you start with public forums, what is zoning?
Yeah.
Because people don't know what zoning is. What's an overlay district mean? How is this going to impact me? Do I have to sell my house? All that stuff, just drill it down and take away the threatening aspect of any of this stuff.
I think what we've seen across a lot of our communities is this idea that you know, we're talking about zoning and there's not a specific development that people can get upset about necessarily. We're talking in very kind of broad terms, it's all kind of theoretical. So it is a little hard for people to wrap their heads around. But that's what we're here for, is to try to educate, you know, the public and really get you guys prepared before you go into town meeting. That's why we're doing this forum on Monday, is, you know, try to inform folks as much as possible. I know, you know, it took us a little bit to even wrap our heads around this legislation. So definitely want to, you know, focus on that the next couple months as we go towards town meeting. Just try to, you know, show the public what we've been working on and what we can bring forth to town meeting.
I think if it's possible for Gerard and the team, and as we decide as the boards what might work better, I mean, this is probably an evening meeting at the library.
6:30.
Maybe as we go forward, this happened with the village at the Little River project, you know, as it starts to approach and people really have an understanding of what's really starting to happen, and I might be really wrong and we'll adjust it to another even meeting or something, but we used to have like a Saturday meeting at the elementary school, remember, Martha? You know, where the kids could actually come with their parents maybe and walk around and ask questions. I mean, I think for this to have legs, it's gonna have to take a real lot of work to, I mean, I've asked a lot of real stupid questions tonight.
No questions, trust me, we've asked a lot of questions and no question is
And I'm
stupid.
supposedly kind of up to snuff on
Yeah.
this stuff, so you can imagine what people that aren't thinking about this
Well, I think
are thinking about.
the people in general, I think it's human nature to approach, like, what's in it for me? So if you look at this as what's in it for me, if you don't own a parcel that is potentially gonna be an overlay district, then what's in it for you is that your town is still gonna be able to get grant monies. It's gonna be a better impact on the taxpayer because, you know, the town of Newbury has been able to do a lot with state funding, grant monies and stuff, and not lean on the taxpayer. We've been very good. We have staff that is phenomenal at writing and winning grants. Martha, present company right here. So, that's important that people understand that we will no longer be eligible for that, and it's gonna come out of your pocket anyways if we don't do that.
What you're gonna get a lot of is, like, your thoughts on the piece that's near the industrial park. You're gonna get a lot of people coming out, because if it's on Hanover Street is kind of a busy street now anyway.
Right.
You're gonna get those things that people are gonna have immense questions about.
Right, and if, what's in it for me, if I own the piece of parcel that we're looking at to put an overlay district on, then we gotta look at it, we gotta have to have an answer for the good, the bad, and the ugly.
I mean, if we zone over, your property value is probably gonna go up if you are in this overlay district.
Right.
Because now it's a much more valuable property to put in multifamily housing.
That's what I think.
So that's the benefit for that person. And in general, you know, you went to the taxes as well, not only to get the grants help offset the stress on local taxes, but also multifamily housing is valued higher, and so if you did see construction, you're getting more tax revenue out of a multifamily building than you would out of a single family home.
Right.
We see in most of our communities, so that's a benefit for the community as well.
But I can see somebody, like if one of those parcels that, I don't know if it was A, B, or C, pick one, pick A. If it has 3 parcels on there, and they're 3 different owners, and it's all zoned the same way, and lot 1 is sold, and a multifamily is built on lot 1, I could see the owner of lot 2 and lot 3 not being very happy.
Or if you're right outside the district, because that's questions come up before. If you're right next to it and not in it,
That's
what's
what I
the
said.
impact to
Yeah,
you
the
as an
impacts, the
individual?
impacts, you're gonna get a lot of talk.
That's we need to think about.
And you're gonna
And maybe
get,
that's again where we go back to that, how much do we wanna talk about the zoning versus the building at this stage? Certainly, people are gonna ask those questions and we wanna be able to respond to it with their concern. So thinking about how much with zoning do we dive into it versus the theoreticals of if a building does happen.
Do we have to have the whole package done all at once?
What's the whole package?
Okay, and I can explain that, I hope. Like, for example, can we just zone it? Just zone it,
That's what we're gonna do.
right, but the bylaws. You know, in other words, if we're trying to sell this to the town to create these zoning, but we don't have to convince everybody on what the bylaws are gonna look like right away, because we really don't know, we wanna do more.
Oh, no, we're passing a bylaw, we have to know what the bylaw says. Town meeting can't vote on something that they don't.
Well, no, but I'm asking the question.
Yeah.
You have to do a zoning bylaw amendment.
So the
It has to
bylaw
go
has
through
gotta
town
be
meeting.
built into whatever the zone is that we're gonna produce,
No, the zone is the bylaw.
yeah.
And I think you wanna include those design guidelines, because it's a package here, that's the board's.
Teeth.
That's our control.
Exactly.
No, I'm not saying not have one.
Yeah.
I'm just saying do it in pieces instead of doing it all at once.
Well, what if we do it? Listen, I always thought that was a good idea. I don't think that like that anymore. I think that this is what we need, this is what we say we need, and this is what we go for. If we break it up in half, we're only gonna get half of it, we won't get the whole thing done, and then we're gonna be in trouble as it comes on down.
Some of the concern's gonna be that they're gonna be 2-bedroom apartments, and there's gonna be 4 kids, 2 in each room.
No, I know.
So that's.
And we can pull some data for it, just to
but
show
that's-
that
that's-
doesn't happen.
That's what's gonna
It's not
come
gonna-
right at us.
Yeah, or it's
And
gonna
we're
be a
gonna
family
get
of 18 living in 2
200
bedrooms.
kids in the school system.
Look at the other way.
Yeah.
It's a way,
And
it's a way
I-
for the
and I know.
family that's in the house, the 6 rooms, to say, hey, listen, I can now get out of this monster, and I can live in something that's still.
And somebody else can mow the lawn.
The way we see this is kind of a filtering effect that we're looking at in our communities. You know, there's steps to it. We zone for it, it gets built. Maybe you have some folks that downsize into that unit, and then that single family home opens up for a family. But that would happen over 10 years, you know, that we would see something like that. But that's the idea here, is that we have to take these steps now to see that filter, and that also comes into some of those age projections that we looked at. You know, those projections are based on your current conditions. If you don't do any, if you keep the status quo, if you've done what you've done in the last 10 years, you're gonna see that kind of breakdown. But it's about, you know, taking that step, taking that first step towards you know, encouraging that filtering effect to have more options for multifamily housing in town. So it might not happen right away, but that's the idea, is to see that happen at some point.
Alicia, I
Is
think
there a
it-
cutoff right now that we have to is there legislation right now that is pushing all of us down the road to comply with the multi-housing and bring our quota up to standard, you know?
In terms,
or-
are you thinking about 40B right now when you say
No,
quota
I'm
to
not thinking
standard?
about 40B, I'm thinking about.
In
like,
this case,
the-
all you have to do is zone by the,
ability to even address getting any grants, that if we don't comply with a certain percentage that we have in town that we're supposed to allot for a certain number of people that we have to provide housing for.
If we don't do it by 2025, we're in
25.
trouble, right?
25 is our deadline.
it's December of 2025.
December.
And so you have until then to create the zoning. Like we said, we don't have to house anyone, so it's just the zoning. And at that point, after December 25, if you don't have the zoning, that's when you would lose access to those grants. As of right now, you have that interim compliance, like we mentioned at the beginning, because the town submitted an action plan saying we're working on this essentially to the state. And you have that until December 25.
So realistically speaking, there's really a lot of work that has to be done to get the zoning changed in order to put everything in place to move forward.
Right, and so for that reason, we are proposing to go to this spring's town meeting, because if it doesn't go well this spring, you have the spring of 25 to do it again. And so we don't wanna get you up against crunch time, so since you have 2 years, we say let's try it once this year, and if it doesn't work, we try it again the next year with something different and see what happens.
And it's funny, you can sit here and think 24 and 25 is you know, kind of far away, but I mean,
It's
it's
not.
April.
Yeah,
Right.
be here before you know it.
Right, and just
Right
for the
there.
process that we have to go through, we've gotta refer to the select board, come back for public hearing and all of that, so.
Yeah, so just so my board understands that this is gonna something that you will see this again. So this is just an informational night, we listen to it, like I said, we gotta think about it. And then we can go to that December 11th forum, but then the planning board will eventually make a vote to send it to us. And then we'll have to vote on it, send it back to the planning board so they can have a public hearing on it. And that's all his timed, so we can't just delay it.
We can't delay it in having sat on the planning board. It already has been something that's been talked about for a very long time.
Oh, I know, since the law was passed.
And then the last thing I'll say, but just from our standpoint, just you referenced it earlier, are you coming to town meeting? We're happy to be engaged as much or as little as the community wants. So in some communities, we're fully in the background, running the numbers and sending it to the select board or planning department for them to run the show. In some communities, we're doing everything. We're happy to be as public or as behind the scenes as you want throughout this process. And so we can come here as often as you want, or just be a face on the back end to talk to about
Well,
it.
I think you should put the date of our annual town meeting, pencil that in right now.
Oh, no, permanent marker.
I think
See,
it was
you
mentioned
heard-
that your
she
boss
wanted to do
lives
it
in town
in
here.
Yes, yeah.
December 11th,
this
is on our website.
When you have your informational
The
forum on
word's gone
Monday,
out.
will that be
So hopefully-
something that will be recorded, and will we have the ability to put it onto the
This
town's
is-
website?
Well,
So-
this is being recorded and it's gonna be uploaded.
Right, but where this is not an agended item for us, will it be recorded?
This one here?
On
No,
Monday.
Monday,
Do we have recording?
Yeah, Ethan is gonna be there, he's gonna be filming it.
okay.
So it won't be broadcast live, we don't have
Right.
that capability there, but it will be recorded.
That can be posted on the website, I assume.
Yeah,
Do you have a draft of the actual bylaw yet, or is that something that is in progress?
It's in progress, so we've been putting it in, like everything we showed you today is currently what we have in there, but we know a lot of that's gonna change. So it's just a starting point,
Meeting in
as
case
we
you
get
do have a
feedback, yeah.
quorum. If you can't make it, it's.
Did you have a
it's okay.
question, George?
I was just gonna say, you know, to your point, I've been to so many town meetings, and you can picture that individual walking up and making the comment, much like you said, like, what's in it for us as a resident? And that can often steer the momentum. And so I think, you know, Monday will be a good opportunity to sort of get a temperature check from folks. But it may prompt us to think about more of the questions and the arguments behind this, or why would you even consider this as a resident? And we can think about what those questions might be, and maybe have some of that lead the discussion at town meetings. So we're really helping to set the stage for why would you even think about this if you're not near it, or, you know, it's not impacting your parcel directly.
So I think we also have to look at the root cause of why they wouldn't want it. Like, why? You don't want it, why? And, you know, try to get to the root cause of that, because then we'll have an answer for everything.
Well, there'll be a lot of anticipatory fear, you know, that I don't understand this, I'm afraid, what it's gonna do to me, and,
Right.
you know, and those are the types of things we have to do our best to answer.
I think when the Newburyport News says, Newbury Planning Board and Selectmen have zoned 5 pieces of property for multifamily houses, that'll bring some thought.
And will it only be these different districts that will have the ability to have the multifamily, or will it be townwide?
It would just be in these districts, that's the only place we're talking about doing it. And like we said,
That
we're,
would kind of calm people down, and that,
yeah.
you know.
And we're even narrower than that we showed today. Like we said, right now, we have about 70 acres of potential. If you wanted to just beat the bare minimum, you need about 15 acres. And so think about what we showed you today, and that's a small section of your town. Even less than that, we're not talking like a ton of area.
Yeah, it could be one parcel out of the 5.
It could be, yeah.
Martha, what do we have in town now? How does these attached buildings, or am I dreaming about them? Some of them have been built rather recently. I mean, if I drive by them, it looks like there's 3 attached buildings.
Yeah,
Why
accessory
isn't that
units.
multifamily housing?
multifamily, I mean, right now, under our bylaw, it's allowed in the OSRD as an option,
Because
so,
we have some like,
right, it's a Caldwell Farm, basically, I mean, those are
sure,
multifamily
and also
townhouse.
DePero's piece and,
and we allow multifamily, by special permit in the Upper Green Business District and in the Byfield Village. So the Woodbridge School was developed as a multifamily by special permit.
and I just wanted people to realize that we do it. It's been done. It's not something that's totally alien to Newbury,
It's just
The difference
another
is,
right.
this is just making it by right instead of by that special permit.
within the zone.
Any other thoughts or questions? Like I said, we're interested in more feedback as we go forward, but anything else for tonight that we didn't touch upon?
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you all so much for having us here today. It's great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Do you close the meeting, or what do we do?
Yeah, I guess,
Want me to close? Rob?
Motion?
whatever you'd
I
like.
think that was a motion. Mary, did you just
Mary,
make a
just
motion?
make a
Mary
motion.
just made a motion.
Would you want to second that motion?
Second.
I think
What do you
a
second?
motion and second.
All in favor of
Yes,
adjourning?
yes.
We're done.
Thank you.
I motion that the select board adjourn.
I'll second that.
All right, all in favor? Aye. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.